Hello, my name is O.C. Marie Taylor. I was born in DeRidder, Louisiana, and raised in DeRidder, Louisiana, and San Francisco, California. I have resided in San Francisco for the last approximately 50 years. Today, I would like to share a story about growing up in both Louisiana and San Francisco. I want to start my story on April 8th, 1966, which was the last day I saw my dad alive. I just took a look at what today is, and it is November 2020. I've been paying close attention to this year's presidential election. I sit here thinking about 1966 and 2020. 55 years ago in 1965, Bloody Sunday happened with 600 peaceful marchers crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, on their way to the Capitol in Montgomery, Alabama. Activist John Lewis, then a young man, was almost killed. Activist Jimmy Lee Jackson had been killed a few weeks earlier fighting the same fight for Black people to have the right to vote. They called that event Bloody Sunday. That was 1965. Here we are in 2021 now, post-election, and we are fighting the same voter suppression that we were fighting some 50 plus years ago. John Lewis died after serving in the Congress for many decades, and he passed away just this July 2020. I'm looking at the television as voters in cities of Atlanta, Detroit, and Philadelphia are trying to overcome suppression once again. The difference is this time the suppression did not work, although the racial divide continues. Now, I arrived in San Francisco on Memorial Day weekend, 1967. I immediately fell in love with San Francisco because of the weather. We took the Greyhound bus, myself and my two younger sisters. We were picked up from the bus station, the Greyhound bus station, by my Aunt Osie. The last stop before arriving in San Francisco had been Los Angeles. The temperature was way 100 degrees, just like Louisiana. So I had assumed that when I arrived in San Francisco, wearing shorts, that it would be just as hot. But much to my amazement and satisfaction, it was 64 degrees. My legs chilled up, and I looked at my Aunt Osie and I said, I'll live here the rest of my life. And she said, no, you won't. You'll go back to your mom's. Well, my dad had passed away on April 12, 1966. And that day is a vivid memory in my head because when I saw him on April 8th, he asked me to do him a favor. He asked me if it was Good Friday, right before Easter. He asked me to take his $25 and go buy 4 Easter dresses for me and my 3 sisters. And before I left, he said, Osie, take care of the family. And I said, okay, Daddy. I'd never seen him look that way before, but I just figured I'd see him in a week. And I left to go get these 4 dresses. I could see them right now. All 4 were Empire dresses. I remember mine, it was red, and it had a black marker on the hem line. So I went to the sales clerk and I said, I would be able to buy all these dresses if you would just take a couple bucks off this one, and I could have all 4 dresses for me and my sisters for Easter. And the clerk said yes, and I got our Easter dresses. So that's when I met my Aunt OC, was when my father passed away. So now we're moving forward to her sending for us in Louisiana to come visit her in California. And now I've reached this amazing weather at the end of May. When I arrived here, I was going to be 12. But since NOC and my other Aunt Gert, who also lived in San Francisco, they didn't really know our ages because they had just met us the year before on April 12 at my dad's funeral. So I raised my age to 14. Later that same summer, I got busted when my mother called to wish me a happy birthday. But they didn't really remember the next year when I returned in 1968. Because in 1968, I told them I was 16. And I got a job at S.H. Kress on Market Street. I worked at the lunch counter. And I would work all summer, save my money, buy my sister's school clothes, and OC would buy my school clothes. And I also played poker, bridge with my Aunt OC, with my Aunt Gert and Uncle Ted for money. So I also had the benefit of having a big jar of money or either an empty jar, because we were not able to take the money out of the house. You had to be able to open with jacks or better, so you had to have some money in the jar. But the good thing is when I was time for me to go home, the second week of September, to return to Louisiana, I was able to take whatever monies I had won. I remember one time I had over $60. I think it was a rift between a cousin and I that never ended, unfortunately. From being in charge, put in charge by my dad in 1966 on his deathbed, and returning home after having worked in San Francisco, I felt like I was really in charge of my family. And I took charge. I have 3 sisters, Sanji Gail Williams. She and I graduated the same year, 1971. And I have 2 younger sisters, Debbie Lee Williams and Jimmy Elizabeth Williams. My sister Sanji has moved back to our hometown in Louisiana. Both of my sisters now live on the East Coast, but the whole family of them, all 3 of them and their families, moved their lives from Louisiana to Dallas, Texas for over 20 years before they moved on to the East Coast and Sanji back home to DeRidder, Louisiana. And I have this question about myself. By becoming a covert and not speaking up instead of an overt, and speaking up about my race and inequalities that were going on in different parts of the world that I knew about, did I contribute to the hard issues of racism and inequality? Now, I moved back to Louisiana to go to school. And when I graduated high school, which is a whole different story about integrating high schools, and I would like to tell that story one day. But when I graduated, I got a scholarship to Southern University in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So I didn't go back to San Francisco that summer. I went to Southern University. Actually, I graduated at 16. That's the real age. And I started college that summer. It was a work study program. So you had to work and pay for your studies. And I stayed about a year. And my mom struggled after my dad passed on April 12, 1966. She struggled with alcoholism. So while I was at Southern, something happened and she was not able to send money anymore. She had my two younger sisters, but what she did is she moved back to Detroit and left my two sisters with her niece. And at that point, I knew I needed to come home. And home to me was San Francisco. And I was going to bring my two little sisters there to grow up. They were in 7th grade and 3rd grade. When I returned to San Francisco, I got my job back at S.H. Kress, but I was no longer working at the lunch counter. I was now working in the record department. And when I say that I was a covert when I worked, because bosses would say to me, "OC, watch the Black kids, they steal." And I would say, "Oh, okay." Never said a word about that being a racist statement or Black people are not the only ones who steal, things that was going through my head. I would just say, "Oh, okay," with a smile. So now I'm working in a record department and I have a good friend who's Caucasian. And one day when I first started the job, I was so excited. Can you imagine? You were like 18 and running a record department to me, that was a department store, but it was a 5 and dime store. And my boss said to me, "Now, OC, you're going to have to really watch the Black people down here because they steal." And I said, "Okay." So I had my Caucasian girlfriend to come to the record department and buy anything she wanted, pick anything she wanted, and I would give it to her for free. So that was my way of getting back with mischief for saying making a racist comment that Black people steal. So I ended up staying in San Francisco and I got a job at the Hotel St. Francis, a 5-star hotel downtown San Francisco. I was hired as a catering sales representative. Now, in between having worked at S.H. Kress, relocating my sisters to California, I also relocated my mom, and we all became a family in San Francisco. My oldest sister, Sanjay, even joined us for many years. So I get the job at the Hotel St. Francis. And the reason I get this job is because that week, the NAACP and the National Urban League were having a convention. And they had found out that there were no people of color, no Black people specifically, represented in the sales office. So I showed up at the right time on the right day. I had been off work, having my tonsils removed. And one of my mom's patients, my mom used to take care of elderly patients. And I was recovering at mom's house where she took care of these patients. And one of the patients, her name is Regina, she told me to go to the St. Francis because she knew I typed really fast and they had a stenography department. So I go there looking for the stenography department and I end up getting hired in the catering department. So I worked at the St. Francis for several years. And the book that I was sent home with the day I got the job was called the Escoffier, a French cookbook. And after working a few years, I wanted to advance in the hotel business. So in order to become a real salesperson, I had to go through the management trainee program. And I went through the management trainee program. I think there were 2 people of color, me and another girl from Seattle. And while I was going through the program, I met a person who liked the way I looked. And they sent me to an agency. And went to this agency and I became a photogenic model for Jimmy Gourmet in downtown San Francisco on Grant Avenue. So I had the life at the St. Francis and I had the life of a model. It was a very exciting life. And I kept my sisters very close because being a photogenic model means that a TV commercial can net you quite a bit of money. And McCann Erickson hired me to do a Coca-Cola commercial, which sent big paychecks home. And my sisters and I had a great time. I had my own apartment downtown. My sisters lived in a community called Crown Colony, where they had a swimming pool and a jacuzzi, and they were popular at their high school. And we had a great old time. They know nothing about the effects of Jim Crow because they were young enough to forget it. They only knew about things that happened in San Francisco. But as I sit here today in 2020, I still wonder, was I living right? Did I desert my race? Inequality, racism that was going on in my hometown? Just yesterday, I had a conversation with my sister, Sanji. And I said, Sanji, after looking at the impeachment trials and seeing people like Stacey Plackett and following people like Tracy Abrams from this past election, I said, I think if we would have stayed around, we may have been able to make a difference in our town, me, you, and Shalette. And my sister said, you and Shalette would have made a difference. I think you two would have done well. Shalette made a career out of going to the military and subsequently working for the government. She also volunteered at the polls for voting, just like her mother had done in our hometown. What did I do? I lived in San Francisco and shared and lived a very exciting life that I am now able to reflect on and relate to what is happening in the world that I live in by way of San Francisco. It's very discouraging. However, I want to take it as an opportunity. I want to be a part of the change. I know that age-wise, it's going to be my daughter's peers that will make this change happen. But in the meantime, it's the generation that's in today that are in their 30s and 40s and early 50s that are going to make this change. The Stacey Plackett's, the Don Lemons, the Tracy Abrams, and I should know more names, but my history is with John Lewis and Martin Luther King and John F. Kennedy and those people. I have stories about them too. Down south, Martin Luther King was like a relative, and so were the Kennedys. My aunties had a picture of Martin Luther King in their den, and the ones that lived in San Francisco, there were 2, and one that lived in Louisiana. They had a picture of John F. Kennedy, Jackie Kennedy, Caroline, and John John. And that's the way they called them by name. They talked about them as if they were just their relatives, their first cousins. Same thing with Martin Luther King. And these pictures came from S.H. Kress. They were sent over the waters by the two San Francisco sisters. Now, in my house, because my mom was not born in the South, we didn't have any pictures in my Louisiana home of Martin Luther King or the Kennedys. My mom just didn't get that part of life, and she wasn't going to let it even touch her. And I think that's why she went back to Detroit. We have more to come. Thank you.